If you know it, I invite you to join with me now in our prayer of preparation. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Today we begin a new series called Love to Stay. Much of what you'll hear over the next 4 weeks is taken from the book of the same name. There's plenty I won't go into, though, so if you like this series, I invite you to read the book as well. Our first foray into the topic involves a piece of paper, one over half of the U.S. population currently holds. That piece of paper is a certificate of marriage. The number of married couples has been on the decline for years because of things like cohabitation, single-person households, and single parents. But it is still the single largest group in terms of people's living arrangements. My hope is that over the next few weeks, the relationships of couples will be strengthened and all of us can find a way to live in better relationship with everyone around us. So let's get started. There's a story of an older couple that lies down to go to bed. The woman says to her husband, "When we were younger, you used to lie close to me." The man sighs and moves a little closer. Then the woman says, "I remember when you used to hold my hand." The man sighs again, a little frustrated, but reaches out and takes her hand. Then the woman says, "I remember when you used to nibble my ear." This time the man angrily throws back the covers and gets up to leave. Shocked, the woman asks, "Where are you going?" And the man replies, "To get my teeth." I imagine that's the kind of relationship that many of us want. One where the other person is willing to do just about anything to make us happy, even if it makes them a little mad along the way. But it seems like more and more relationships are heading in the opposite direction. People still need love and intimacy. That hasn't changed. But if you look at marriages over the last 30 years, you'll see a consistent trend. The probability of divorce for a couple getting married today is between 40 and 50%. Many others remain married but have big differences and painful struggles to work through. Young people today seem to have seen these issues in their parents and decided to wait longer for marriage or not get married at all. The average age for a person's first marriage today is 6 years older than it was a few decades ago. In my experience, weddings hardly ever happen today where bride and groom have married parents. Some that choose not to get married at all are simply living with their loved one, but their success rates are even worse than those who get married, with 50% breaking up within the first 5 years. Whether it's marriage, cohabitating, or something else, it seems as though we are not sure of how to have lasting, loving relationships. So with so few succeeding at marriage, where do we go to learn about how to have lifelong, loving relationships? In order to get a driver's license, you have to pass a test, and high schools offer driver's education to teach what we all know is essential to safe driving. But a marriage license, to get that here, you need just $28 and an ID card. There is no training, no preparation, no certification. Some churches, including ours, require premarital counseling, but when you're young, you may not be paying attention because you figure that love is enough. You know, I often come across pastors who perform weddings with zero premarital counseling. They make a quick buck performing the wedding, but they do absolutely nothing to prepare these people to fulfill their vows to have and to hold until death do us part. If you haven't had any training in how to keep a relationship for a lifetime and then hit a rough spot, where do you go for help? You can go to a counselor, but many people, and in my experience, mostly men, think going to a counselor is an admission to failure. So among married people, that looks like one spouse saying, go ahead, you can see a counselor, but I don't need one. Guys, that's like driving a car that you love and deciding it's not manly to take it to a mechanic if it overheats. You can keep on driving it, but eventually you'll ruin the engine. For us to hold on to lifelong relationships, it is pretty much essential to talk to an objective third person that is trained in helping people work through issues. Some people think that since marriage and cohabitation and lifelong relationships are so hard that people are simply not cut out for long-term monogamous relationships. A Pew Research Center study found that 40% of people think marriage is obsolete. But among that 40%, most of them still want to get married themselves. In the same study, married folks were up to 28% more likely to describe themselves as very happy over those who were single. Now, there is nothing wrong with being single. Many singles are happy too. But it seems to me that marriage is not obsolete. And it offers something very valuable to us as a society. The trick is to figure out how to make it work. I know a lot of young people, some of them friends of mine, who have chosen to cohabitate instead of getting married. They say, we don't know why we need a piece of paper to prove our love to one another. I've also heard people say that a legal contract for love is just plain stupid. One person described it to me as letting a bird fly free so if it chooses, it can come back to you. But what I see in marriage is much more than a piece of paper or a bird set free. In the book of Genesis, we see Adam, a creature loved by God, who is told it is not good that man should be alone. So God makes him a helper as his partner. Some call it the new and improved model, women. And Adam says to himself, this at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She compels a man to leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, and they become one flesh. The story tells us that marriage is God's gift to men and women, a way of blessing us as it meets a fundamental existential need we have as human beings. It's not about romance and emotions. It's God's offer of a partner, a companion and helper to walk with us through life. Some people might object to a woman being called a man's helper, but you know who is most often referred to as the helper in the Bible? God. The idea here is not that a weaker person is there to serve the stronger, but that two people bring their mutual strengths to the relationship in order to bless one another. Both people in a relationship are meant to be each other's helpers and companions. It is a covenant to bless and minister to one another. It's not about fixing all the problems a person has, but to come alongside them, encourage them, and build them up. In the New Testament, there are two words that are used to describe love. Some of you might know this already. One is eros. It describes the erotic part of love, passion and sexuality. It's also related to Cupid, that cuddly angel who shoots people with arrows so they fall in love with each other. But you can't build a long-term relationship on eros alone. If things are going to last, it has to be transformed into something more substantial, something that will help and encourage your partner. Eros has to change into agape, another word for love that describes a selfless, sacrificial love that wishes the best for the other. We read the Apostle Paul's words from 1 Corinthians 13, a passage that is often read at weddings. It describes agape love. Let me read part of it from another translation. Love never gives up. Love cares more for others than for self. Love doesn't want what it doesn't have. Love doesn't strut, doesn't have a swelled head, doesn't force itself on others, isn't always me first, doesn't fly off the handle, doesn't keep score of the sins of others, doesn't revel when others grovel, takes pleasure in the flowering of truth, puts up with anything, trusts God always, always looks for the best, never looks back, but keeps going to the end. Love never dies. That is the kind of relationship we are called to. And I'm not just talking about married folks either. That's the kind of love that is meant for all people everywhere. Let me end with this. During the Bosnian War in the 1990s, Serbs were bitter enemies with the Muslims in that region. There was one Serbian couple who had a son that was taken away by Muslim police for questioning and never returned. 5 months after their son's disappearance, the wife of the couple gave birth to another child, a baby girl. Because of food shortages and the incredible stress of the daily shellings and bombings, the mother was unable to nurse her daughter. The family gave the baby tea for 5 days, but she began to fade. The baby was dying, and it was breaking their hearts watching it. But on the 5th day, just before dawn, the family heard footsteps at their front door. They found their Muslim neighbor there. He was one of the few people in town that owned a cow. In his black rubber boots, he handed them a half-liter of milk. Other people in the neighborhood mocked and insulted this neighbor, telling him, "Let the children of our enemies die." But he wouldn't listen. For 442 days in a row, he came to their front porch and delivered milk to them in his rubber boots. That's when the family was finally able to flee the country with their little daughter still alive. Through it all, the neighbor never asked for a dime. That, my friends, is agape. That is selfless love that wants the very best for another person. It's what all spouses need and what all relationships should have. It's love that lasts. It's love to stay. Amen? Amen. Amen. Before we move on to communion, I want to point out something this morning. In your bulletin, you'll find a section that is labeled Reflect and Engage. In it, there's a portion of it that says Wedding Vows Review. And this is something for the couples in our church. I invite you and encourage you to do this. Review your wedding vows with your spouse. And if you're single here this morning, there's another section that's labeled for you. Some thoughts for you. If you plan to get married and are single, and even if you're single and plan to stay that way, a section for you as well. I invite you, go over this. Reflect on it with someone. And if you're single, think it over. And I invite you, go over this, review it sometime this week. So we're moving on to communion now. I invite those who are assisting in Holy Communion to come forward and to turn to page 12.